Are you guys familiar with this book? Oh, wait, there's Bill. I know Bill is. It's called let's see, Why Not the, and I'll tell you about it. It's a very interesting book. Let me get my glasses here, which are somewheres around here.
Sorry, I missed that. Which book was that?
That you have this book.
Oh yeah, on my
Yes.
Kindle.
I'm gonna type it into the chat here because it's a pretty interesting book.
Yeah, it is.
Let's see, where did here, let me turn the volume up. And where's the chat? Oh, here it is. And this one that I use is called the essential, meaning it's not the whole thing, kind of
Yeah.
encouragement because it's a huge long book. So it's called the essential Hua in on Zi. Okay, that's probably enough right there for you to find it. Okay. Oh, here I got to do this. So I'll give you a little background on this. It was written by a guy named Liu An, who wrote this whole book that was supposedly all the teachings and all the sacred books of all of China, because he was really trying to impress the king at the time, because he wanted to be a king himself. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way for him, but it's a really great it's a great collection. And here's the make sure I'm spelling this right. I mean, pronouncing it Hua In An Zi, which is taking from his name, the master. That's the country he lived. It's a compendium of knowledge dating from China's early Han Dynasty, one of the most famous dynasties. One of the ones that's easy to remember because it was a sort of a couple hundred years BCE to a couple hundred years CE. So, like 400 years, which is really a long time when you think about it. And yet it is only one of the many long-lived dynasties in China. Um, right after this, there was the so-called Qin dynasty, which is where the called the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, who's buried in that giant um, mausoleum that Bill and I visited many years ago with the terracotta warriors. Okay, so it was compiled under the auspices of, and probably with the active participation of this guy, Liu An, who was the king of this small kingdom, Huainan. Um, Liu An was an influential member of the imperial family who ruled a sizable kingdom within the Han Empire. So there were there's the emperor over everybody, then there's various kings and nobles and princes and all that stuff. Um, he was also known as an essayist, critic, poet, and patron of learning. And I've mentioned before that in ancient Chinese culture, of course, the emperor's over everything, but the highest level of society were scholars, people who could read, that could write, that could memorize huge amounts of material. And then it went down to, I think after that was the peasants, because they're the ones who grew all the food that everybody ate. And then there were the merchants who were on a lower ladder of culture because they made their living off of what other people created. And then the soldiers were at the very bottom. So this guy Luan was a king of his province and part of the imperial family. So he wrote this book to be able to give it to the emperor so that he could rise even further. 21 chapters. And the parts I'll share with you tonight, you can see where it's heavily influenced by the Lao Tzu, by the Dao De Jing. 21 chapters contain a comprehensive survey of contemporary knowledge from self-cultivation techniques, stuff from Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, um, where am I? To the arts of rulership, and from cosmology and geography to public speaking, military affairs, and importance of education. And of course, this cosmology and geography is interesting because the Chinese came up with this book called the Book of Mountains and Seas, which is ostensibly a book about geography, but they also throw in a lot of mythological beasts and mythological mountains. So it's all kind of mixed together. That's another very interesting book, and there's some pretty good translations of that too. And the book's final chapter summarizes the entire work and claims that it synthesizes the best features of all other schools of thought, thereby creating a compact yet comprehensive distillation of all knowledge necessary for ruling an empire. So this is an abridgment. So you can imagine 21 chapters of everything supposedly it would take to be able to rule an empire. So yeah, I'm going to skip that part. The central organizing metaphor of this book, of this teaching, is the concept of roots and branches. In other words, that certain ideas, concepts, institutions, and texts are fundamental, while others are derivative or peripheral. I thought of lately, I get this thought once in a while. A lot of you know I published a Taoist magazine for 25 years, the only Taoist magazine in the West. And then I passed it on to someone else, and then it folded not long after that. But I thought about maybe doing a free online or an online publication called Roots and Branches. It was one thing that came into my mind one day, my mind and heart. So here he's talking about the roots and branches. The roots, the kind of music that one of the kind of musics that I love called reggae music. And I'm sure some of you out here are familiar with reggae music. And reggae music, especially people like Bob Marley, Burning Spear, Peter Tosh, all those kind of people, were part of a new movement of this kind of music in Jamaica, which was started out as ska music and then mento music and then become reggae music. And a lot of it was very political, very religious. There's this whole kind of cult called the Rastafarians. You probably heard of. That's sort of a kind of a bizarre cult, really. But the people that were really, nobody in Jamaica, nobody really in Western music was talking about the kind of things, political things that Bob Marley was talking about, Burning Spear was talking about. And they called this kind of music that was political and religious and cultural roots music. It's finally what I'm getting to here. And my oldest son, whose name is Shasta, who's like in his 40s, mid 40s now, when he was a little kid, the first words I taught him how to teach, that first words that I taught him how to say was roots rock reggae, which he pronounces woots walk reggae. So a little aside there. Um, so put another way, the roots are associated with the principles and the way meaning Taoism, and the principles of Taoism that we know now as Wu Wei, watercourse way, being natural, Zuren, this being spontaneous and in the moment and very natural. So those are kind of the roots, and the branches are associated with, quote, affairs or actualizations of the principles of the way. So, in one way, you could think of Tao as the roots and then the branches of these principles as another way you could look at it. And the branches are nothing without the roots. Like the tree is nothing without the roots, right? The tree has to be deeply rooted. We, in our own cultivation practices, need to be deeply rooted so that we can use these practices of these branches that come out of the rooted being of the tree so that we can create a feeling and experience in ourselves as being a rooted, strong tree that is able to withstand the winds of change and obstructions and challenges of our life. So that's why, I always emphasize doing the practice of the rooting and grounding practice. So let's see. Here's the other one I was trying to do. Wu Wei, this principle of Wu Wei. One could call it the deeply rooted branch or principles of the way or Taoism. Pretty much the whole lifestyle of the Taoist goes along with that Wu Wei, not forcing, not overdoing, not overextending, not pushing the river. Master Ni Once in one of his books, he mentions that he said, I can describe the whole lifestyle of a Taoist in 3 words. Take it easy. So here, their definition of Wu here is, well, Wu literally means not acting or not doing. But in this book, the Hui Nanzi generally does not refer to a state of utter inaction, of course, because it's very influenced by Taoism, but to the ability of a person, especially a ruler, because remember, that was going to be the audience of this great compilation of teachings. The ruler, a person, especially a ruler, to be so attuned to the way and therefore so filled with potency, the word here, capital P, they're using potency as a translation of the De from the Dao De Jing, that his desires are translated into reality without any visible effort on his part. So we know that the Dao De Jing talks a lot about the ruler and the prince, but we know that possibly there is some influence where people are using it as a political teaching, but mostly according to Taoist people, the king, the ruler is us. We are the ruler and king of our own kingdom. So all this idea of things happen in our life, things just fall into place because our minds are so free, our hearts are so free that we don't have to work so hard to make things happen the way we want them to happen. It's like what he's just describing the ruler as his desires are translated into reality without any visible effort on his part. Things that occur through Wu Wei appear to come about, quote, naturally or, quote, spontaneously, which is that principle of Ziren. So transformation is also a big part of Tao Te Ching and certainly a big part of the I Ching, the book of changes, or sometimes translated as the book of transformations. This idea of the character Hua, or transformation, is the most profound of several terms for change. And here he says in parentheses, change, comma, alteration, comma, shift, comma, and so on in the Hui Nanzi. A sage ruler. So this is another way that it comes through in the Dao De Jing. Whenever you see the term ruler, it means sage. And also the idea of rulers are very enlightened. They are a sage ruler. And the first rulers of tribal people were also shamans and sages. Those were the people that were connected to the big, big nature, the internal world of nature, the external world of nature. They could journey in a shamanic way and bring back knowledge and practices for the people. So those were like the first rulers, like the sort of so-called mythical rulers of ancient China, Yao and Shun and people like that. And then there's this idea of the sage ruler. The ruler is not just politically very savvy, but they're very politically and energetically savvy as well. And in that way, they can rule their kingdoms with the least interference, not having a lot of huge taxation, too many laws, too many dire punishments, and that they are just in their very being, they are inspirational for their subjects. So there's not a lot of rulers that have really managed that, and certainly not all the rulers of China didn't manage that. But that's the ideal. A sage ruler is able to, quote, transform the people by projecting his potency or de in such a way as to evoke a spontaneous positive response in the natures of the people in his realm. So whether you're talking about the emperor of the Han Dynasty or a prince of a small kingdom or one of us, one of us who's the ruler of our own inner kingdom, who uses these principles to evoke a spontaneous positive response in our own life, which is something we would all love to be able to do, right? So we use all these different principles. Well, they go into some confusion. There, by the way, this book is a lot of Lao Tzu, a fair amount of Zhuangzi, a lot also of Confucius. Yeah. Oh, here's another part I had highlighted. So the very first chapter of this book draws very heavily on the chapters of the Tao Te Ching. You know, the Tao Te Ching was written 2,500 years ago, supposedly dictated actually to this guy Yin Shi, who put it all together as a book. And remember, in ancient times, books weren't books like this, where you would go to a bookstore and buy, or certainly you didn't go like online and buy these ancient books, and they were written. They were all handwritten on bamboo slats, like starting from the right to left, top to bottom. And then all these little bamboo slats, which weren't very wide, only like this wide, because they found some of these in ancient tombs in China. And then they were tied together with string and then rolled up. And that would be the book. It would that you would unroll. Just like a lot of paintings were scrolls that were opened right to left. And some of them, there's one, there's a very famous one. It's like 20 feet long, and it's amazing. And it's just a painting of this whole town along this river, and all the little all the river and the boats and the houses and the people in the streets, and it's really quite amazing. And also letters were written that way too. You would in Japan as well. When you were got a letter, it'd be something all folded up in this really creative way, and then you would unfold it like this as you were reading it, which is a very I like that. I wish people still wrote letters like that. Of course, I wonder if there's a way on online that you could fold up your emails in a way that people would have to unfold them. I'll look into that. So he's saying here, just like lots of the affairs of the world cannot be deliberately controlled. Deliberately is the opposite of wu is yo wei, which I find kind of amusing, you. So this would be when you're trying to rule your kingdom of the Han Dynasty or the kingdom of your own inner being. The affairs of the world cannot be deliberately controlled. You must draw them out by following their natural direction. So that's kind of also a little bit reminds me of this idea of the Japanese and the Chinese way of opening the letters. They were drawing it out. Or you have people that you work with. People may even be under you, if you're the boss or the emperor or the head of the family or whatever. You wouldn't be forcing people into an unnatural state to control them. You want to allow people to learn and act and create in their own natural way, because if you make the rule that everyone has to do it a very specific way that you create, there's the spontaneity and the naturalness is lost. Right? Okay. The alterations of the myriad things cannot be fathomed or understood with the intellectual mind. You must grasp their essential tendencies and guide them to their homes, which is a beautiful poetic way of talking about whether it's people that you're working with or whether it's your own prolectivities. I think that's the word, your natural prolectivities that you can create in a certain way that's very simple, very natural. And it's like you're taking these ideas and these projects and these principles and guiding them to their home. Their home is where they naturally live in, where they naturally go. And you can use that principle in governing, in music, in writing, in painting, just a way to live your life. Does that make sense? That which is tranquil from our birth, what we receive from birth, is our heavenly nature. Stirring only after being stimulated, our nature is harmed, meaning trying to stimulate our nature to be like someone else or be like what the government or the teacher tells us to be. We're stirring it in an unnatural way and we're getting far away from our heavenly nature, which is where most people live. It's really difficult to live your life in the modern world really aligned with your heavenly nature. When things arise and the spirit responds, this is the activity of perception. When perception comes into contact with things, preferences arise. And that's that part that Zhuangzi talks about before everyone was living in a very natural way. Or if you're just someone who's really trying to live your life in a wu way, of course, I realize that that sentence says, try to not try to live in an wu way. um, we get opinions and judgments and preferences. This just happens to all of us. But he's saying here, when preferences take shape and perception is enticed by external things or external ideas, what other people say is right, even if we don't feel it's right in our own heavenly heart, our nature cannot return to the self, and heavenly patterns are destroyed, meaning we're not natural beings anymore. Because we bent ourselves so out of shape to fit in with what we think we should be doing and the way we think we should be thinking and the way we think we should be living and the way we think we should be feeling about the myriad things, the 10,000 things, the Wan Wu, the 10,000 beings in the world, in the universe. There's this other principle called Pu, spelled P-U. And there's a wonderful book on Taoism that I often recommend to people when they first want to learn about Taoism called The Tao of Pooh, Pooh, which uses all these stories from the Pooh, the story of Pooh, the bear, written by a guy in Portland, Oregon, whose name I can't remember right now, but it's a little paperback book. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And I've shared some things from that book with some of these classes. He also wrote a sequel called The Duh of Piglet that, at least when I first read it, I wasn't too impressed. But the first one I love. So why am I talking about the Tao of Pooh? Ah, Pooh, nature. Sometimes it's translated as the uncarved block, like the uncarved block of wood. It's like who we are naturally. Some people are very outgoing naturally. Some people, they can get up in front of a crowd of people and sing songs and recite poetry and dance, where someone else that would seem like torture to them to get up in front of a bunch of strangers and do that kind of stuff. And that's all well and good. We all have our own nature. But sometimes if people say they force themselves to be outgoing or force themselves to do more stillness practices than is in their nature, even though these practices are very good for them, even though sharing their stories and music with the world would be a really good thing, then they start kind of get twisted and they're not the simple, uncarved being that they were born as. Though our life as human beings, remember that phrase that was just used, hua, is transformation. So the idea is that we are always growing, we are always transforming. We are the cells in our, even the cells in our body die off, are expelled, and then we grow new cells and we grow new lining of our stomach, of our heart, of our brain. Things are always changing. We're always changing. I mean, when I was young, I was, all the way through my youth, all the way through high school, I was so neurotic and I couldn't hardly speak to other people. And I certainly never spoke to girls. And I had very few friends. And I just decided I was going to be a tortured poet in my life because I was reading books by tortured poets, Rimbaud and these kind of people. Although I did in my last year of high school find a book in my local library in where I lived in Methuen, Massachusetts, um, written by a guy from the next town over, Lowell, Massachusetts, who this guy Jack Kerouac, who wrote a book called The Dharma Bums, which was a book about his friends, Allen Ginsberg, especially Gary Snyder. He gave them all different names and everything, but it was he was talking about Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, and I was like, "What is this?" I was raised in Roman Catholic. This is like heathen stuff here. But it was so interesting and so beguiling. And I started getting books out of the library on Buddhism and studying all that kind of stuff. And then I finally graduated high school and left my family of origin. And the 60s happened, and everything changed. Um, but what I'm getting at is that we're always transforming and changing, even if we don't notice it sometimes. You think, well, I've always been this way. When you think back, well, maybe I wasn't this way even 3 or 4 years ago, or 10 years ago, or when I was a child. Hopefully we are transforming and changing in new and exciting ways throughout our life, right? That's what teachers are for. That's what masters are for, to lighten our way. The real master, whether it's a Buddhist master, Taoist master, Sufi master, they are a light. They describe Jesus in the Bible as lighting the way. That's not the exact phrase, but a lamp. He says, be a lamp on, wait a minute, lighting the way. The Buddha on his deathbed said, be a lamp unto yourself. And the master, whether it's Master Jesus or Sufi master or, anyone that's a big influence on your life, they are a light. They are shining a light into the darkness in front of them. And we can take the first steps on that path into the light on our own because they've lit the way before us. But at a certain point, their light stops. It's like a flashlight will, go across your whole yard, say. But once you get into that yard, then you're in the darkness. Then you have to create your own light. You have to be your own light. Then you can be a light and possibly light the way for someone else to follow and then find their own light. And it goes on and on. And we've been doing it for thousands, if not millions of years. Am I making sense with that? Okay, all right. Um, so then in another chapter, he says, those who break through to the way return to clarity and tranquility. And of course, those are big principles in Dao De Jing, right? Tranquility, clarity. Those who look deeply into things end up not acting on them. People who are looking really deeply into what life is really about starts finding themselves as someone who is not trying to get ahead in the rat race world, and they're finding the light of ancient teachers and maybe teachers in your own life, and then following that light. If you use calmness to nourish your nature and use quietude to transfix your spirit, then you will enter the heavenly gateway. That's pretty much almost a direct quotation from Lao Tzu, but it's certainly, in some ways, that's kind of the entire teaching of Lao Tzu in that one. It's not a paragraph, but it's one, two, three, four, six, 5 lines. Those who break through to the way return to clarity and tranquility. Ah, those who look deeply into things end up not acting on them and not forcing your way onto them. If you use calmness to nourish your nature and use quietude to transfix your spirit, then you will enter the heavenly gateway. or what Christians call the heavenly kingdom. Okay. I like this line, this actually, these two words in this line saying the vital essence or chi circulates through our body, things like the small heavenly orbit or various circulations we do, this large heavenly orbit. But I love these two lines. These people who are breaking through to the way, their vital essence circulates into the capitalized magical storehouse, and they become human along with what fashions and transforms them. Becomes human, probably human is a capital H. The magical storehouse. I have to think about that. Maybe I could write a song about the magical storehouse. It sounds like an incredible string band song. Any of you who know the music of the Incredible String Band, who were a very magical group back in the 60s. So he says, if you wish to be firm, firm or strong, rooted, grounded, you must guard it by being pliant. This is back from Lao Tzu too, right? If you wish to be strong, you must protect it by being supple or flexible. When you accumulate pliability or suppleness or flexibleness, you become firm. When you accomplish suppleness, you become strong. So that's part of that really unique teaching from Taoism and about if you want to be strong, you must become soft. The soft overcomes the hard. And that translates into the philosophy, into the practices of like Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong, all those kinds of movements where it's like for people who don't know much about Tai Chi, or in the West we call it Tai Chi. Sometimes I describe it as sort of slow moving, like underwater ballet. You know, you're moving very slowly, but there's a real force. It's an inner force. All your movement is coming from inside you, especially from lower dantian, what the Japanese call the hara, from our really rooted center. And then we're moving out into the world, like moving out like this way into the world. And then we're pulling back so that it's always balanced. And we start, most Taijis forms start moving to the right. I mean, beginning, we always do this thing, and then we start doing this thing to the right. And you learn a form, and then to really bring your practice to another level, you start on the opposite side, which sounds very simple, but it's actually very challenging. The first time my Taiji teacher back a long time ago, David Cheng, we learned this form from him. And then one night he said, okay, well, now we're going to do it from the opposite side. And it was really hard. It was really challenging. Like, okay, now moving this way. Whoa, wait a minute. Now my foot's going out there. And it's a really great practice. Even if you do a few simple Qigong moves, try doing it to one side and then the other side to help balance both sides of your brain. You know, the Taoists were some of the people, early scientists, who talked about yin and yang and talked about different sides of your being and your perception and your intuition, which in modern language is the two sides of your brain. And the more they can be, there's something called the corpus callosum, I think is what it's called. And it's the area that's a bridge between both sides of your brain. And I may not have that term, that scientific term right. It is something like that. Okay, we're okay here. Those who attain the way, their wills are supple, they're flexible, their wills. People think of willpower means, you know, really you have to push your way through something, develop willpower. But here he's saying when their wills are supple, which is a form of strength according to Taoists, their wills are supple, but their deeds are strong. Their minds are empty, but their responses are dead on. What we mean by a supple will is being pliant and soft, calm and tranquil, hiding when others, well, I don't know, that line seems off to me. Being calm and without worry. That's something, we're all working on. I'm certainly working on that a lot. Acting without missing the right moment. That's also part of Wu Wei, doing the right thing at the right time in the right way, which is a really difficult thing to do. That's mastership when you can master your way in the world in that way. And cycling and revolving with the myriad things. That's myriad things is that one Wu, the 10,000 beings, all living life, everything that is alive, even rivers and mountains, and certainly trees and plants and animals and humans, and even stars. Never anticipating or initiating, but just responding to things when stimulated. And of course, when you read that, it sounds kind of like somebody's just sitting around doing nothing and they don't respond to the life and to life unless they're stimulated. But they're kind of using this in a kind of a extreme way. So the sage, Lao Tzu says the sage goes about doing nothing and nothing is left undone, meaning they go about doing nothing, but they are actually doing things. It doesn't mean you don't ever do anything. You just sit around and never do anything. But you're doing things in such a natural way, in such a non-forceful way. And remember, Lao Tzu says the sage, she makes things happen. The way she teaches her students, she does it in such a subtle way that the students think that they've come up with the answers themselves. She's giving them the answers, but she's doing it in such a subtle way that to them it's not, oh, the master has given us the answers. They're like, oh, I think I just up with the answer myself. And of course, that's what the sage is looking for. It doesn't bother her that she's doing that on purpose. He or she is doing that on purpose. If you wish to be firm, you must guard it by being pliant. Oh, I think I already said this right? Yes. Okay. Let's go to the next thing. When the mind is not worried or happy, it achieves the perfection of potency. Potency meaning the de and the Dao De. And now, when they're saying not worried or happy, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to be happy. It's more the extreme. Anything taken to an extreme, even joy taken to an extreme, can injure our heart, especially. Joy taken where people are just they go into an ungrounded, unrooted way they express their joy, and it's kind of hysterical. I've often said we all know people who we have friends, we have people we know who laugh constantly, but we know that they are actually not happy in their heart. And their laughter has a kind of tinge of hysteria in it. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know people like that? Yeah. And you would think, well, anyone who laughs all the time must be happy, but that's not always true because their laughter is not grounded. When the mind is interalterably expansive, it achieves the perfection of tranquility. When the mind is inalterably expansive, it achieves the perfection of tranquility. I think perhaps one of the things they're getting at here is in the 60s, we talked about expanding our consciousness, right? That was a big term we used back then. Expanding our understanding of how the world works, expanding our understanding of who we are and how we work in our life. So the more expansive your vision is, the more expansive your understanding is, you achieve the perfection of tranquility. When the mind is without likes and dislikes, at least not extreme likes and dislikes, it achieves the perfection of equanimity. That's another principle in Taoism. When the mind is not tangled up in things, it achieves the perfection of purity. Now, tangled up in things means what the Taoists and Buddhists talk about duality or dualism. When our mind is not entangled with all the things that the world throws at us, then our experience of ourselves, our hearts become what they call pure. If the mind is able to achieve these qualities, then it will break through to spirit-like illumination. That's that idea of enlightenment, right? Illumination. Another idea of light. We Many cultures talk about this idea of being the light of the world or enlightened. And enlightened can mean you're the awakened one, which is what Buddha means, or that you are helping to light up the way for others that I was just talking about as a sage or a master or a teacher. Even if you're only lighting the way up, sometimes we just need like maybe 10 steps lit up in front of us so we feel safe that we can go on this journey and we're not worried that we're going to enter into this dark, scary place. We have a little way that the master or the teacher is giving us some light. And then the further along we go, we start producing our own light, or what they call here spirit-like illumination. Love that phrase. Therefore, if you use the internal to govern the external, then your various endeavors will not fail. Most of the time, we have this idea of what we want to create or what we want to achieve, and we start with the outer ideas. Then I'll have more money, or then I'll have more riches in the world. Then people will respect me, or something like that. And they're using the external. But here they're saying use the internal to govern the external, and then your various endeavors will not fail. If you're able to realize internally, then the external can be attended to. Now, this book has 4 authors on this book, including Harold Roth, who's a pretty famous scholar of Chinese studies. I'm not sure who the other people are. So there's the thing about Chinese is there's a lot of ways to translate these terms. Even the words can be translated differently, which is why if you look at a lot of different translations, say of the Tao Te Ching, there are things online where someone has put up like 11 or 12 or 14 or 20 translations of just those first lines of Tao Te Ching. And some of them are very different from each other, right? Because it has to do with how well you're educated in the Chinese language, how educated you are in Taoist philosophy, educated to how experienced you are in doing Taoist practices, and a number of other things. So sometimes I see things translated, in other words, that I don't necessarily think it's the right way to translate them, but I am not a scholar. So um, the next line is very interesting. If you realize it internally or you understand it internally, like you're moving from the inside out, then your 5 orbs will be in repose. So the 5 orbs are like our organs, like when we've done those organ balancing meditations. The 5 orbs, the 5 organs are sometimes translated as the heavenly orbs. And it's, the liver, the heart, the spleen, the lungs, the kidneys. And each one of those, of course, in the Wuxing system has a color, even a flavor, a flavor of food, a musical note, a direction, a power animal, all those kinds of things. So they're saying if you can live your life from the inside out, then your five orbs will be in repose or in balance. And further, worries and anxieties will be at peace. That sounds good. Your sinews will be powerful and your muscles will be strong. Your ears and eyes will be acute and clear. Though you are placid and calm, even though you are totally chill, you do not waver. Though you are hard and strong, you do not break. So you're not strong like a branch of a tree that breaks easily. You're more like the bamboo that's really hard to break, right? There is nothing you overshoot and nothing you fall short of. So if you're really grounded and rooted in Tao, there's nothing that you can overdo or underdo. Nothing you can overshoot or fall short of. And the last part, when you dwell in the small, you will not be cramped. You will not have a cramped feeling. And when you dwell in the great, you will be unrestrained. You can just keep going. Your soul will not be agitated, or your spirit really will not be agitated. Your soul will not be agitated. Your spirit will not be troubled. Clear and limpid, still and calm. And I love this last line, you will become a hero to the entire world. And then he goes on to say, thus the world is a spirit-like vessel, which is a really different way of looking at the world, right? A spirit-like vessel. And further, you cannot act deliberately on it. You cannot control it. So if you think of the world around you, and certainly if you start thinking of the world within you as the world and yourself as a spirit-like vessel. I love that image. If you can experience yourself as a spirit-like vessel. The next line he says, those who attempt to deliberately act on it, those are those who try to go yo way instead of ooh way, will be defeated by it, and those who try to control it will lose it, which is what we're seeing happen now, right, with climate change. People are trying to control nature and funnel nature in a way that they could they could extract all these dragon bones and dinosaur bones and stuff like the oil and the coal and run the world by it and control the world by it, are finding that, uh-oh, this isn't going to work. And there's only a finite amount of this stuff to get out of the earth. And we're certainly feeling now this principle of get everything we can when we can out of the earth is changing everything. It's a little scary what's happening political in my country right now, because the people who are going to be in charge are the people who still feel like that's what they want to do. Because a lot of those people are so filthy rich that when the climate goes out of control, they're going to be in their underground bunkers or they're going to be in their mansions, that they're perfectly safe. And the last part, therefore, if you realize the way, there's nothing to rejoice in and nothing to be angry about, nothing to be happy about, and nothing to feel bitter about. You will be mysteriously unified with the myriad things, all the world. You will be mysteriously unified with the whole world and all living beings. And there's nothing you reject and nothing you affirm. You'll be in the middle way. You transform and nourish a mysterious resplendence. That's a good image, isn't it? You transform and nourish a mysterious resplendence. And this last line, what generates life is not life. What transforms things is not transformation itself. The idea that there is something behind the curtain of all transformation, what Lao Tzu calls Tao. He says there's something eternal and unchanging, and I don't really know how to describe it. I don't really know what to call it, so I'll call it Tao, meaning great. Tao is great. The heavenly realms are great. The earth is great. Human beings are great. And they're all lined up with Tao. Okay, well, our time is almost up, but I wanted to hear from anybody here who has questions or comments about all this.
So this text is sort of trying to summarize all the existing classical knowledge in a way and sort of rephrase it.
Yes,
Is what's
yes.
going on. Yeah, it's very interesting.
And he gave it to the emperor, and the emperor thought it was pretty nice, but he was expecting a lot from it. He was expecting to be sent to a really high post, and that didn't happen for him. Liu On, the author of this book. I mean, there's a lot of other stuff in this book. I'm sharing more of the sort of cosmological, cosmic Taoist stuff. He had a lot of stuff by Confucius and a lot of political stuff also. So I hope you found some of these ideas and images inspiring or useful or interesting, at least. I know I did. Yes, Joni.
Yeah, interesting. I think I'm struggling so much right now in all the changes that are happening in my life that I'm just not sure how to apply anything to me right now.
Really?
I'm like, um,
Well, if there's
I'm just trying to away and let it go,
yeah.
let it flow and see
Hmm.
what comes what comes to the surface for me.
Well, according to the Taoists, if we can reach that place within ourselves of that grounded, rooted being, that place that's actually safe, even though there's a lot of scary stuff going on around us or even possibly through us, then we can be like the calm in the storm. The storm is, but in the very eye of the storm, which is called the calm of the storm in some places, the whirling craziness of the storm is whirling around us, but there's a center that's very calm, unmoving, grounded, settled, strong, fearless. And that's a really hard place to get to. I'm not saying you just decide you're going to be there and you're going to be there. It's really hard to get to that. But that's what all the teachings of Taoism, you could pretty much compact them all into that one teaching.
So
And
rather than trying to struggle to understand it all, just
oh,
to
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot of stuff we'll never understand, I think. And we think we should understand it because of the way we're taught in the West, especially. We think we should understand it. We should be able to be in control. We should be able to know what to do from one day to the next or 1 hour to the next. And sometimes we don't. You know, there was a book I read years ago by a Korean Zen master, and the name of the book was Only Don't Know. And that sometimes that's where we dwell. We dwell in that place of not knowing. And that seems like a crazy, scary place to we who have been raised in the West, because we think we really should know what's going on. We should know what to do. But sometimes we just don't. And we need to just relax and just be in that unknowing and trust that not knowing. And that at some point further down the road, you will understand it. Or maybe you'll live your whole life in not knowing and not understanding.
Or at least getting to a place where you realize you don't need to understand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But that's helpful. I'm just,
There's a lot of that in the Tao Te Ching. Or that sage goes about doing nothing, saying nothing, forcing nothing, teaching nothing, yet everything around them is falling into place. That makes
that
any,
seems like, I'm dealing with a lot of loss in my life right now.
yeah, that's a tough one.
And it's like having the rug pulled out from
Yeah,
underneath me. So
yeah.
uh, I'm really very unknowing right now.
But that can be an okay place to be.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we treat ourselves badly, we beat ourselves up. I should know what to do. I should know how to deal with this. Sometimes you just have to relax and say, I don't, I really don't. And I'm just going to live my day moment by moment and deal with what is right in front of me. And loss, especially when it's very sudden, like what happened to my son a few years ago, that's really difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah. But fortunately, we have these teachings from these all the great saints of all the great spiritual teachers through all the great ages that can help us. And we use them as examples. There we go.
Yeah. That's helpful. To just
Good.
let go of trying to understand it all and or control it all somehow.
Especially, yeah, if we think that we're the one has to be in charge. That's, I mean, sometimes we do that because we want to help other people. If we're in charge, then we can help them. And sometimes we are in charge, and sometimes we can help them. And other times we're not in charge and we can't really help anyone else. We're just trying to stay afloat ourselves.
Yeah.
And especially as you age, that happens more and more, I think, more. I just found out last night about a good friend who just passed away very suddenly. Felt kind of weird, went to the hospital, and bam, she died. That could happen to any of us at any time, which is scary, but also could be kind of interesting. The great transformation is what Zhuangzi calls it. What about you, Chris? DC, you got anything to add here? We can't hear you if you're speaking.
Yeah, no, I was more caught up with the Jeffersonian thought of the government is best that governs least
Mm-hmm.
earlier in the conversation.
That's totally Taoism. Yeah, that's totally from Lao Tzu. Yeah. Yeah. These people of their time, Jefferson was of his time. He had slaves, he had children with one of his slaves, but he also was a really far reaching mind, also.
Yep.
Yeah. And people will say, well, he wasn't so great. He had slaves, or Washington had slaves, all these people. But, they went as far, they actually went further than people of their time, but they weren't perfect. Jefferson had this cool thing he rigged up. We had this kind of pulley thing where he would write a letter and there'd be a pen on this other thing that would write a copy of the letter. It was one of the first like copy machines because a lot of his letters he was writing for other people or, he wanted to keep a history of it. So he would write and then it would write a copy of it next to him. Or Benjamin Franklin, was a very far-seeing person, especially for his time. And Mark Twain, who's another one who was very far-reaching for his time, non-racist, supporting women's suffrage, all those kinds of things that he also moved a little further. There's some saying in history, I don't remember the phrase, maybe you do, something like certain people move it a little far down or far ahead, and then the next people move it a little further. There might be something from Lincoln or something that talks about that, or maybe Jefferson, or maybe Obama. I can't quite remember. Yeah. So next week is the last one in this session. So I'll send the video out tonight. I love seeing that recording button on. And I'll give you guys a link for next time. I mean, for the time after next time. Because it's always beginning and ending in the same circle, right? That's the way I like to look at it. So thank you all for listening to me as I ramble about. And I'll see you here next week. Okay, bye for now.